First, I want to just let you know I'm joining you all from the Coast Salish lands of the Puyallup tribe, which is also known as Tacoma, Washington. I'm a Lakota descendant of Ochete Shakawin. My mother and relatives are Hunkpapa Oyate and are members of the Standing Rock tribe. It's a privilege to be here today and share space with so many people dedicated to the peace movement. And although we are unable to meet back in person in New York, I too want to honor the ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee, Kateri Tekakwitha, and the enduring resilience of the Mohawk people. Impending collapse or regeneration. When I saw the title and was invited to speak this morning and share the stage with Greta, I was really drawn to the topic as something that I've really wrestled with in my own life. And that is really the question of our time, right? The choice ahead of us. And we know that we must choose something different because what we've inherited and even what we're doing now is clearly not working. Next month, COP26 will begin, where the international community will meet once again to try to come to an understanding that the destruction that we are putting on the planet is pushing our own survival to the brink of extinction. And we still have not been able to find an answer or come together to find common ground in that. So we know that we must explore new ways of being and new solutions. And a lot of what Greta explained, I think is really promising and really gets me excited and gives me hope towards the future. So this morning, I really just was going to share about my experiences as a soldier and war resistor, my personal journey to healing, and then some of the lessons that I believe are essential for this deeper cultural transformation that is needed to truly create a peaceful and sustainable future. My path to the military was an unusual one. I actually enlisted in the Army just a few months after returning home from a mission trip to Thailand. How does a missionary end up signing up for war, you might ask? Well, I didn't grow up in a church family, but as a teenager, I had a born-again experience on psychedelics that led me to the church. Then in high school, I developed a passion for service while volunteering and spending the summers in Mexico building houses for the poor. After my first year of college, I dropped out to explore the mission field. When 9/11 happened, I was in Kona, Hawaii at a discipleship training school, preparing to leave to an orphanage in Chiang Mai, Thailand for 2 months. And while I was there, I remember one of my instructors compared Islam to communism and spoke about this being the next great barrier to the gospel being spread around the world. I didn't realize how much that influenced my decision to join the military until later, but it definitely did. When I returned home from my trip in 2002, I decided to fly to Germany to visit my dad, who was in the military and stationed there. My parents divorced at a young age and I didn't spend much time around him. But when I was there, I got a job at a military base and met the first wave of soldiers that were deploying and coming back from Afghanistan. I was really drawn to their commitment to country. And in the aftermath of 9/11, I felt inspired to enlist myself. I figured I would get money and travel, money for school and travel a little bit. So in 2002, I enlisted in the Army and was on a plane back to the States for basic training. After completing this, I went on to airborne school at Fort Benning, Georgia, then Fort Huachuca, Arizona for interrogation school, followed by the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, where I was trained as a French linguist before getting assigned to a military intelligence unit with the 82nd Airborne Division. The invasion of Iraq happened during my 18-month training, and although I was skeptical, I didn't understand how we shifted from Iraq, but I tried to stay focused and do what I had to do in order to be successful at my job. In 2004, I was deployed in support of the first stage of Iraqi elections and worked alongside tactical infantry and special operation units around Baghdad and Mosul. The first mission I was tasked with was a counter sniper operation along Highway 8 in Baghdad. Working with a team of Navy SEALs, we set up decoys and spotted staged spotters to identify locations that insurgents were operating in the area. After the area was secured, we flew to Mosul to provide support in an uprising there. Soon after I was deployed, the Abu Ghraib scandal happened. And for the intelligence community, we really started, they started questioning interrogation tactics that were extremely stressful to prisoners, because now the whole world was watching. Before this, methods like inciting hypothermia, extreme sleep deprivation, and restricting breathing through waterboarding or sandbagging was completely normal. There are a couple instances in particular that really stood out to me while I was deployed that really made me question my ability to operate as a soldier. I daily would be on patrols and saw the physical and emotional harassment of prisoners. Numerous times on convoys, I saw soldiers sideswiping vehicles on the highway and beating out windows. Another time I saw infantry soldiers shoot and kill Iraqi livestock. And finally, in one tragic incident, I witnessed a young teenage boy that was innocently killed. And these experiences really traumatized me and questioned my loyalty to the mission and also my loyalty as a soldier. All of these incidents were reported to my commander, yet they were swept under the rug and considered casualties of war. When I started seeing what was really happening on the ground, the occupation and the daily abuse of power, it really disturbed me. It became clear that these type of incidences were actually fueling the insurgency that we were trying to fight. Although I joined the military to serve God and country, I soon realized I was serving neither. Once a missionary and passionate believer, I felt lost when I returned home from combat. I didn't understand how other Christians could support the war and explain the injustices that I had seen. When I got back, I was really trying to understand foreign policy, and that's when it really kind of all began for me. I started to interrogate reality, and then my whole worldview fell apart. I was consumed with authors like Chris Hedges, Howard Zinn, and Noam Chomsky, Edward Said, who painted a very different world from the one that I knew. The first chance I had to take leave, I purchased a book in the airport that connected all of this for me. It was Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. This book pushed me over the edge because it really connected the dots where I realized the role that the US military plays in the global quest for power and resources by historically saddling underdeveloped countries with enormous loans for new infrastructure development and using military force to achieve this level of global dominance. For months, I met with Army psychologists and chaplains trying to reconcile this crisis of conscience inside of me. I felt deeply convicted and ultimately decided that participating as a soldier violated my ethics and beliefs. I started having anxiety attacks, and one night I just went AWOL and left a note on my door explaining that I could no longer serve, with a quote from Martin Luther King that reads, "Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right?" There comes a time in one's life when they must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but because it's one's conscience tells it's the right thing to do. So I left and packed my stuff and drove back to Washington, where I was raised. And after being AWOL for over a year, I turned myself into the military because they had still not dropped me from the rolls. They were not wanting to release me because of the training that I had and the money they invested in my experiences there. They had not separated me administratively yet. So I connected with the GI Rights hotline during this time, and they provided me with wonderful personal and legal assistance. In August 2006, I made a public statement at the Veterans for Peace Conference in Seattle and surrendered myself to military authorities. I ended up getting sent back to my unit in North Carolina, sentenced to military jail, lost my GI Bill, and received a bad conduct discharge. That was a really hard time for me. I lost a lot of friends, and even some of my family members looked down on me. Adjusting back to society as a civilian was difficult for me. My worldview was shattered and I didn't know how to make sense of it. For a while, I was angry and really active in the anti-war community, but I struggled with that group and even felt tokenized at times. when I was invited to speak at different events. For a lot of people, my experiences were really cool and exciting for people to want to share, which I understand. But I was really broken and didn't understand how to move forward, and that wasn't often acknowledged, and it hurts. So I was trying to understand war, but was really discovering that the driving force behind U.S. foreign policy has always been the control of natural resources. I felt ashamed about being an American and even my own spirituality. I was ostracized from these communities and felt really isolated. The more I connected the dots, I began to realize that the energy war happening around the globe was creating military conflicts like the war in Iraq, and I couldn't escape it simply by being out of uniform. When I moved back to Washington, I started working for a friend of mine doing landscaping, and he taught me about plants and permaculture, which is a design system used to create regenerative landscapes by observing and following the patterns of nature. This was such good medicine for me. Learning how to nurture life rather than destroy it totally altered the way I viewed my relationship to the world. I began to understand and experience the interconnectedness of the natural world, and this became therapeutic and healing to my spirit. I felt a deep connection to the earth and began perceiving my spirituality in a completely different way. During this time, I was also learning a lot about the climate crisis and was really drawn to the solutions-based approach in permaculture because it offered me a new framework and toolkit to address the problems around me in the world. Before, in the anti-war community, I often felt paralyzed and unable to make the kind of change that we need in the world, where permaculture taught me to scale down my approach and provided me with practical and tangible tools to be an agent of change in my own environment. I initially started, doing permaculture design and landscape projects on a residential level. So there's, wonderful work that Greta's doing on the farms and teaching people the processes of nature. And there's also really exciting ways to integrate those concepts on a residential level in a urban or suburban community. And one of the projects in my permaculture design course accumulated with a project for United Methodist Church to build a community garden. And then that led to an opportunity to help design a food forest here in Tacoma. When I started realizing that there was grant money and there was capital floating around for projects like this to really make a difference in my community, I started looking at permaculture in a different way. And scaling up those concepts. And so, inspired to learn, I was drawn to urban planning as a way of similarly moving energy flow around and bringing regenerative life back to communities. I entered the Sustainable Urban Development Program at the University of Washington, and there I learned important lessons inside and outside the classroom that gave me a new sense of hope about the future. I entered my program jaded and viewed the government as a ceiling that restricted social change. But soon I studied grassroots efforts that laid the foundation for the social, political, and environmental movements of today. Outside the classroom, I learned how communities are working to create livable and sustainable future. As a student, I had the opportunity to travel to Portland, Detroit, and New York City to study how cities and other communities are leading the way in climate action planning. Networking with local government and nonprofit organizations helped challenge my attitude toward institutions and provided an alternative vision of the future. In this way, I was able to reconstruct my worldview in a positive way and move forward in my life. In a lot of ways, the concepts of permaculture can be scaled up from the garden. So we're not just creating resilient landscapes, but whole communities. In permaculture, we say the action is on the edge. And this is true in the landscape and also in urban environments. The city offers lots of different opportunities to be the change. And the city is where the root of the problem, a lot of the environmental problems we see right now is rooted in urbanization. And so we know that the problem is there, and so is the solution. And permaculture teaches us that the problem is the solution, and finding alternative approaches to engage in finding new ways to address problems that are not being solved. And another way that the city, the role of the city is really leading this type of change across the country. When we see that lack of commitment from the federal government, it's local governments that are taking the initiative in creating documents like climate action plans and making commitments to address emissions and all of these destructive patterns that are happening in on our cities and in our community. So what I started learning, is really how interconnected these problems are. War is fueled by so many other different parts of our society. And it became really apparent to me that I couldn't change people's minds by, speaking politics to them all the time, that we needed a deeper, common ground to be able to connect, to discuss these, the challenges ahead. And I think to address these issues on a large scale, we really just all need to start on a small scale. Greta mentioned a lot of ways that we can do this in different ways on our properties, and be reimagining our connection to food and place and natural resources. But what we know is waiting for a top-down solution isn't going to work. We need to really start encouraging civic engagement and taking ownership of our own communities, building bridges with these communities, and recognizing the shared goal that exists between different movements. In permaculture, we learn how to read the landscape and observe systems and how they interact in order to create and organize beneficial relationships. When I apply this lens to the social ecosystem around me, I know that I don't have to blaze a new trail to make a difference. I can align myself with others or groups that are already doing this work. So that's what I've kind of tried to do. I like to participate in projects that help the environment, but also build my community. So over the last few years, I've been able to help plant a food forest in Tacoma, depave and replant traffic circles, design our community garden, paint an intersection mural, and lead a number of tree planting projects in my neighborhood. Specifically in urban environments, the tree canopy is a strong indicator of public health. And in cities where I live, it's extremely lacking. And tree canopy is important for a number of reasons. Trees don't just clean our air, but filter stormwater, cleaning harmful toxins before they reach the sea. And they also slow down traffic and provide many other benefits, like combating the heat island effect. So these are issues that people deal with on a daily basis. So it's not just about the environment. We have to look at how certain groups of people are disproportionately impacted by the built environment too. One of my favorite quotes that's really inspired this type of activism, and even exploring art as a form of activism also, is by Arundhati Roy. And she states that our strategy should not only be to confront empire, but to lay siege to it, to deprive it of oxygen, to shame it, to mock it with our art, our music, our literature, our stubbornness, our joy, our brilliance, our sheer relentlessness, and our ability to tell our own stories that are different from the ones we're being brainwashed to believe. And what we're being brainwashed to believe is, first of all, that climate change, is not real. We're also being told that the solutions that are being handled by the government are going to solve the problem, and we know that that's not working. It's not going to work. So I think that some of those issues, when I look at how to really address some of these monumental challenges like addressing militarism and climate change, it can be really daunting and paralyzing when we focus on the full spectrum of the problem. And I think we're in an interesting time right now, especially with COVID, and the role of science in society. And I'm fully respect the field of science and what they can do to inform, best practices. And but there's also flaws in science that we need to recognize as well, that are not helping us solve the problems that we face. The field of science is doing a lot of important work to communicate the urgency of the climate crisis. The evidence is compelling, right? I mean, we know global temperatures are rising, the oceans are warming, glaciers are melting, sea levels are rising, the number of extreme weather events are increasing. There's tons of data on this. However, people don't base their beliefs from analyzing numbers. I think that the conversation on climate change is leaning too much on science. The irony is that Western science got us into this mess by transforming our relationship to nature and then reducing it down to parts of a machine. Now we've inherited a worldview that seeks to dominate and exploit nature in order to maximize profits. Our idea of progress places more value on destroyed environments than protected ones. So when we make a learning method that's built on these ideas, of course, it's not going to be able to capture the intrinsic value of life. As Saeed Hossein Nasir writes, modern science has emptied the cosmos of its sacred nature. This is why I believe the roots of the ecological crisis is a spiritual crisis, because in our relentless pursuit of progress, we abandon the quest for meaning. The natural world became secular and we lost our way. Spiritual ecology recognizes that the state of the environment in the outer world is a reflection of the values we hold in our inner world. When I reconnected with my Lakota relatives, I was really excited to learn that my cousin Denny Gayton is a Lakota linguist and language professor. When Standing Rock was happening in 2016, I was really compelled to reach out and connect to my family that's back there. And I shared my struggle and my own journey with my cousin, and he shared a paper with me that he wrote in college titled, "There's No Alternative to Tribalism," where he basically outlines how the Western order is rooted in a world of fragmentation and therefore cannot embrace the idea that all life is interconnected. This was really powerful for me because the whole time I was struggling through this journey and doubting myself, I wonder if I had some deeper problem with me. So when I read this, it resonated. It made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Maybe I was just finding my way back home. And in the book, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Kimmerer, she talks about what it means to become indigenous to place. And this was part of my own personal healing process, but she goes on to explain how even non-indigenous folks are invited into this process in order to really heal our shared story and create something new on this land that we now call the United States of America. When we have conversations about sustainability or protecting the environment, we usually fail to ever acknowledge our deeper individual relationship to the earth. We are all spiritually connected to all life, but we've been systematically removed from the land through colonization and industrialization. So now people don't even know what is sacred anymore. The Lakota have a saying, "Mitakuye o yasin," which means that all things are connected, or all my relations. This is a prayer that expresses oneness and harmony with all forms of life, but it's also a very real understanding that the trees, the rivers, and the animals are all my relatives. The earth is our teacher and provider of life. It's the manifestation of the divine. And if we really understood our place in the world, we wouldn't be seeing the destruction of ecosystems all around us. We wouldn't continue fighting wars around the world. And I think that in order to truly address the climate crisis, we need to look inside and rediscover the great mystery and the sacred meaning of life. We have to learn to see again. This is the work that I feel called to, rekindling the sacred fire to begin the rebirth of a nation by connecting back to the land. So thank you for having me today. And I want to open up some time for questions, but I will end right there.